You know that feeling when everything finally falls into place? That was me, standing in the middle of my brand new apartment, letting the reality of it all sink in. After 6 years of grinding, sacrificing, and saving every penny, I could finally say I owned my own home. No roommates, no landlord breathing down my neck. Just me, my place, and the life I built for myself. I'm Ava, 28 years old, and this is my story. I remember the day I got my promotion 2 years ago, like it happened yesterday. My manager called me into his office, and I thought, for sure, I was getting fired. Instead, he slid a contract across the desk, one with a much bigger salary than I ever expected. That day, I made a choice. No vacations, no shopping sprees, no pricey dinners. Every cent I could spare went straight into my savings account. But I won't pretend I did this all on my own. A year ago, my grandmother passed away. She was my mom's mom, the only real family I had left, and she left me $150,000 in her will. That money, combined with my savings, meant I could finally stop dreaming and start looking for a home. The moment I saw this 2-bedroom apartment, I knew it was mine. Not too big, not too small, just perfect. Best of all, no mortgage. When I told the realtor I was paying in full, she actually did a double take. Her reaction when I signed the papers? Priceless. As soon as I got the keys, I took 1,000,000 pictures, posted them online, and basked in the flood of congrats and living the dream comments. It felt good knowing people were genuinely happy for me. Then my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach twist. Dad. Ava, he said, his voice as dry as sandpaper. Come over for lunch next Saturday. That call yanked me right back to everything I had tried to leave behind. I was 9 when my mom died cancer. It tore my world apart. But Dad? He wasted no time moving on. Within a year, he married Lydia, and a year after that, my half-sister, Emily, was born. Lydia never liked me, not even before Emily. But after? It was like I was a ghost in my own home. The rules shifted, and somehow, they only ever applied to me. Ava, be quiet. Ava, no friends over. Ava, turn your music down. Meanwhile, Emily got whatever she wanted. The newest clothes, the best toys, vacations planned around her schedule. Dad and Lydia treated her like she was the center of their universe, while I barely existed in the background. Thank God for Grandma Helen. I don't know how I would have made it through those years without her. Her house was my safe haven, just a 15-minute bike ride away. She was always there, waiting with open arms, homemade cookies, and a warm smile. My cousins Ethan, Lily, and little Ben spent a lot of time there too, and unlike my half-sister, they actually treated me like family. Back at Dad's house, things only got worse. Emily turned into a full-blown nightmare, hiding my things, spilling drinks on my homework, spreading rumors about me at school. And, of course, I was always the one who got blamed. Ava, stop upsetting your sister, Lydia would snap. Ava, don't be so antagonizing, Dad would add, not even bothering to hear my side. The day I got my college acceptance letter was the best day of my life. Not just because of the school, though, the partial scholarship was great, but because it meant I could finally leave. The college was 3 states away, and Grandma helped me cover what the scholarship didn't. College felt like I could breathe for the first time. I dove into my studies, called Grandma every week, and barely spoke to my father. He didn't call much either, he was too busy with his real family. When he did, our conversations were short and surface level. After graduation, I had to move back to my home state for work. Thompson and Mills made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I figured I'd stay with Dad and Lydia for a while, just until I found my own place. But Lydia shut that down real fast. Oh, we gave your room to Emily, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. She needs the space. I hope you understand. Dad didn't say a word, not one. Grandma took me in without hesitation. I stayed with her while I started my job, saved up, and eventually moved into my own tiny apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then, a year ago, she passed away in her sleep. A stroke. She left her house to my cousins. It made sense. They lived closer and always helped her maintain it. To me, she left $150,000. In her will, she wrote, "For my granddaughter, who reminds me so much of her mother." The past year had been peaceful. Dad and his perfect little family didn't reach out much. Not even for Christmas. I wasn't surprised. I spent it with Aunt Sarah and my cousins instead, and honestly, it was the best Christmas I'd had in years. Now, as I drove to Dad's house that Saturday, my stomach was in knots. The closer I got, the tighter my chest felt. 11:57. I was early. Better that than giving Lydia another reason to complain. I rang the doorbell and counted the seconds. Dad opened the door, his expression unreadable. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "No hello. No, how are you? Just come in." They were all waiting in the living room. Lydia perched on her usual chair like a queen on her throne. Emily sprawled on the couch, tapping away at her phone. Neither of them acknowledged me. Dad gestured toward the chair across from them. "Sit." The tension in the air was thick. Dad cleared his throat once, twice. Then finally, he spoke. "Emily graduated high school," he said, like it was breaking news. "She's enrolled at the local college." I nodded, unsure what he expected from me. I hadn't even been invited to her graduation. "She needs a place to live," he continued. His eyes drifted past me, avoiding direct contact. I stared at him. I could already feel where this was going, but I wasn't ready to believe it. Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Your apartment. It's in the perfect location, close to campus." I let that sink in. "I'm not looking for a roommate," I said slowly, my brain still trying to process. Dad shook his head. "You misunderstand, Ava." I looked at him, then at Lydia, whose lips curled into a smug smile. Emily, for once, had stopped tapping on her phone and was watching me with mild interest. "We're not asking you to let Emily live with you," Dad said, finally meeting my gaze. "We're asking you to give her your apartment." I laughed. A sharp, disbelieving sound. They were serious. They were actually serious. I sat there, stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening. Give up my apartment? The one I had worked so hard for? The one I had bought with my own money, and yes, part of that money was from my grandmother's inheritance. But still, it was mine. The only thing in my life that was truly mine. My voice, when I finally spoke, was thick with disbelief. "Wait, you want me to give up my apartment? My home?" Dad's face hardened, but I could see a flicker of impatience behind his eyes, like he expected me to understand this was a simple, logical request. "Yes, Ava," he said, as though explaining the most basic thing in the world. "It's just a place. Emily needs it more than you do." I felt my chest tighten. "She needs it more than me?" I repeated, almost under my breath, the words tasting like vinegar on my tongue. "Because she's your real daughter?" Lydia, ever the passive-aggressive champion, chimed in. "Honestly, Ava, what have you done to deserve this place? You're living all alone in a 2-bedroom apartment, while Emily," she actually gestured at Emily, who barely looked up from her phone as trying to figure out where she's going to live for college. "She deserves this more." I didn't even know what to say to that. The audacity of it all. How could he be so blind to the years of hurt I had endured at their hands? I shot to my feet, my chair scraping the floor in protest. "You've got to be kidding me," I hissed, my voice louder now, stronger than I thought I had in me. "You want me to give up my apartment? The one I've worked my ass off for?" "No, absolutely not. It's mine. I earned it." Dad's face flushed a shade darker. "You're acting like this is your money, Ava. Your grandmother left you $150,000. That's what paid for it. Not you," he snapped, his tone colder than I'd ever heard before. And that was it. Something inside me snapped. It was like all the years of bitterness and resentment flooded to the surface in an instant. "My grandmother," I began, my voice low but steady, "was the only person who ever actually cared about me. She was the one who treated me like I mattered. You checked out the moment Mom died, and now you're asking me to hand over my apartment like it's some insignificant thing." Amy, who, up until now, had been tapping away on her phone with a look of indifference, finally looked up at me, her face twisting into that familiar scowl. "You're such a terrible sister," she whined, her voice dripping with fake sorrow. "You've never loved me, have you? All you ever do is ruin everything for me." I couldn't believe it. This girl had made my life a living hell since the day she was born, and now she was playing the victim card like it was some kind of tragic soap opera. I took a step toward her, my chest heaving with anger. "You have no idea what it's like to live with someone who doesn't give a damn about you. To watch them coddle their real child while you're treated like a ghost in your own home. I didn't even get to keep my room after I came back from college, remember? Dad opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. You didn't raise me at all. You abandoned me the moment Mom passed. Don't act like you're some great parent, because you're not. You're just some guy who decided that because you remarried, your new family mattered more than the one you already had. I grabbed my purse from the chair beside me, my hands shaking. You know what? I'm done here. Before they could say anything else, I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Amy's dramatized sobs, Lydia's attempts at comforting her, and Dad's voice calling after me. But I couldn't stop. I didn't want to hear any more of their lies, their manipulation. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought the next time I would hear from them, they'd realize they'd crossed a line. But of course I was wrong. The next morning, my phone rang. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. It was Dad. I almost didn't answer. I really didn't want to. But something inside me, maybe curiosity or just that ingrained sense of obligation, made me pick up. Ava. His voice was stiff, like he had been rehearsing his speech. Listen, I need you to understand something. You're the older sister. You have to help Emily. This is what family does. I could feel the sarcasm bubbling up inside me, but I kept it in check. Barely. Family? The first repeated, my voice dripping with contempt. Where was that family when Sharon kicked me out of my own room? Where was that family when Amy spent years making my life miserable? You didn't even invite me to Christmas, remember? Dad's response was immediate, defensive. That's different, Ava. You're being unreasonable. I scoffed, barely containing my laughter. Unreasonable? Really? You're asking me to give up my home, the one I earned, for a girl who's been nothing but horrible to me for as long as I can remember. Ava, you're crazy, Dad shot back, his voice rising. You need to stop being so selfish. I felt my pulse quicken. No, you need to stop pretending that everything's okay when it never has been. I'm not giving up my apartment, Dad. I don't care what you say or how much guilt you try to lay on me. This ends now. I ended the call before he could say another word, and for the first time in a long while, I felt this weight lift off my shoulders. But then the text started coming in. From Lydia. You've always been jealous of Amy. You're just like your mother, selfish, ungrateful. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. I stared at the screen, a strange calm washing over me. They had no power over me anymore. Dad called over and over, but I ignored him. What was the point? Every conversation would just circle back to the same thing, his demand for my apartment. And my refusal. I knew there was nothing left to say. A week after our confrontation, I decided to throw my housewarming party. My apartment was filled with the people who actually mattered, my coworkers, old college friends, and my cousins. The laughter, the good vibes, the feeling of being surrounded by people who cared. It was like a cleansing ritual, washing away all the toxicity of the past week. Hey, Ava, Emma called from the kitchen. We're running low on ice. I was headed to the freezer when Jack, my cousin, grabbed my arm. His face was serious, which was unusual for him. He was the family clown. Hey, I need to show you something, he said, quietly guiding me toward the hallway. You might want to sit down for this. I raised an eyebrow. What's going on? Jack didn't answer immediately. He just pulled out his phone, hesitated for a moment, and handed it to me. I was at Lorenzo's last night with some friends, he explained, his voice low. Look who I saw. The first photo made my heart stop. There, in a dimly lit restaurant booth, was Lydia. But she wasn't alone. There was a man I didn't recognize, his arm around her, and they were kissing, no casual peck, but the kind of kiss that made everything clear. I stared, my mind racing. Jack flipped through more photos. Sharon was laughing. The man was feeding her dessert. They looked comfortable, intimate, lovers. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Do you think I should have taken these? Jack asked, his voice quiet. I couldn't even answer. I just whispered, please, send them to me. After the party, I sat alone in my apartment, the photos Jack had sent me in my hands, staring at them in disbelief. Who was this man? It didn't take long to figure it out. It didn't take me long to track him down. Sharon, always a bit too obvious, had made it easy. The man's name was Robert Mitchell, and sure enough, there he was, listed among her Facebook friends. I clicked on his profile, and everything around me seemed to slow down. The more I scrolled through his photos, the more my stomach churned. There, in the background of office parties, company picnics, holiday celebrations, there was Sharon. Sometimes just barely in the frame, but it was definitely her. 20 years of professional friendship, or whatever the hell they called it, and I'd never seen it. I'd never noticed. But now, looking at the photos, it was clear as day. Robert wasn't just some colleague. He and Sharon had a relationship far beyond a casual office connection. I kept scrolling, deeper and deeper, until I found a photo that hit me like a slap to the face. It was from 15 years ago, Sharon, in a red dress, sitting next to Robert on a park bench. The caption, "Perfect Sunday afternoon." I stared at it for what felt like hours, my heart pounding in my chest. It was all there. The way her posture mirrored the way Amy carried herself, the way she smiled, the way Robert smiled back. They'd been together for years, maybe even before she married my dad. And the worst part? Amy. I pulled up a photo of Amy on my phone, and my hands trembled as I compared it to Robert's. The resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same nose, the same mouth. Amy wasn't Dad's daughter at all. She was Robert's. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. All this time, I had been wondering why Amy didn't look anything like my dad, and now, the truth was staring me right in the face. She had never been his daughter. She was the product of Sharon's affair with Robert, the man who had been in her life for years. I didn't know what to do with this information. It felt like the kind of truth that would shatter everything, but I couldn't keep it to myself. I had to tell someone. But who? My dad? He had no idea. He still didn't know that the daughter he doted on wasn't even his. It was 2 days before I could bring myself to confront him. I felt like I was walking around in a daze, carrying the weight of the world in my pocket. The DNA test results were still sitting there, waiting for the right moment. Then, the phone rang. It was Dad. Of course. He didn't stop. The calls, the messages, it was all relentless. He didn't understand why I hadn't just given in yet. I answered. "Ava," he said, his voice stiff. "We need to have a serious conversation. Come to the house." I could feel the storm brewing inside me. What was he going to say? Would he plead with me again to give up my apartment? Or was he finally going to realize that this wasn't about an apartment anymore? "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, my voice colder than I expected. When I walked into Dad's house, everything felt off. Like I was stepping into a place that no longer felt like home. The air was thick with tension. Sharon and Dad were already sitting in the living room, waiting for me. "Sit down, Ava," Dad said, his tone hard, almost cold. I did, feeling the weight of everything pressing on my chest. I sat there in silence, watching as Dad paced in front of the fireplace. Sharon, sitting perfectly still, gave me a small, almost patronizing smile. "Ava," Dad started, his voice steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of frustration. "Your selfishness, this refusal to help your sister, it stops now." I had to bite my tongue to keep from snapping. Every word he said felt like a slap in the face. He wasn't talking about Emily's lies, about Sharon's deceit, about any of the crap they'd put me through. No, he was just mad I wouldn't give up my apartment for Emily. "I've made a decision," Dad continued. "Either you sign over the apartment to Amy or I'm writing you out of my will completely. No inheritance. No family money. Nothing." Sharon's face lit up with triumph. She thought she had won. She thought she could push me into submission. But something inside me, something I didn't even know was there, snapped. I forced my face to show shock, like they had me cornered, and I was torn between my love for them and my own self-respect. "I need to think about it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Dad's face softened. For a moment, it felt like he thought I was giving in. He smiled. "Good girl," he said, his voice warmer now. "Take some time. Think about what really matters." I nodded, my heart racing in my chest. But I had a plan. I stood up, my legs shaky with anger and adrenaline. "Can I use the bathroom first?" I asked, trying to sound small and meek. Dad waved his hand dismissively. "Go ahead." The moment I was out of their sight, I didn't go to the bathroom. Instead, I slipped into Amy's room, the one that had once been mine. The room was pink, perfect, just like the life Amy had lived all these years. The room that had been taken from me the moment I was out of the picture. I didn't know what I was looking for at first. But then I saw it. Amy's hairbrush, sitting on the vanity. I pulled out a small plastic bag from my pocket and, with trembling hands, carefully gathered several strands of hair. Next, I crept into Dad's bedroom, where his comb sat, just like always, on his dresser. The wedding photo of him and Sharon next to it. I could feel the weight of it, all the lies, the betrayal pressing on me. But I forced myself to take a few strands of his hair as well. Later that night, I researched DNA testing, paternity tests. The kind that could stand up in court. It wasn't cheap, nearly $2,000 for rush processing, but this would be worth it. The next morning, I drove to the lab. The technician was polite, explained the process, and assured me the results would be ready in a few weeks. But I didn't need weeks. I needed the truth now. The DNA test results came in a plain white envelope, and I knew, without even opening it, what it would say. But that didn't stop my hands from shaking when I tore it open. The results were clear. The alleged father was excluded as the biological father of the tested child. The probability of paternity was 0%. I knew exactly what that meant. It meant that Amy was not my father's daughter. She was Robert's. Sharon's name popped up on my phone a few hours later. I didn't need to read the message to know what it would say. We're tired of waiting. We need your decision on the apartment within the next few days, or you can kiss your inheritance goodbye. I sighed. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I've been thinking about everything, I said, my voice calm and steady. I'll come over for dinner Saturday. We can discuss it then. Saturday came, and I felt the knot in my stomach tighten as I drove to my dad's house. This time, it wasn't anxiety that churned inside me, it was anticipation. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of something. The DNA results, the photos from Jack, everything was in my hands now, and I was done being manipulated. When I arrived, I could already sense the tension in the air. Sharon's car was in the driveway, and Dad's truck was parked just a little too close to the door. They were waiting for me, like a trap had been set, and they thought I was walking right into it. I rang the doorbell, and my pulse quickened as I waited. When Dad opened the door, his expression was colder than usual. He stepped aside without a word. "Come in," he said. No hello, no warmth, just the same old distance. They were already in the living room, sitting in their usual spots. Sharon was perched on the armchair, smug as ever, and Amy was sprawled out on the couch, a snarky smirk plastered on her face. She didn't even bother to look up as I walked in. "You're late," she muttered, but I didn't respond. Dad motioned toward the chair across from them. "Sit," he ordered. The room felt too small, too suffocating. I sat, folding my arms over my chest. The tension between us was thick enough to choke on. Sharon looked at me, her smile a thin, calculating thing. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how to win. But I was done letting them dictate my life. "Ava," Dad began, his voice tight. "We're not going to drag this out any longer. You've had time to think, and we need a decision now." I nodded slowly, making a show of weighing the situation. "Okay," I said, drawing out the word. "I've thought about it." Sharon leaned forward, eager, her eyes glinting with expectation. "And? I'm not giving up my apartment," I said calmly. The words landed like a bomb. Dad's face darkened, his jaw tightening, and I could see Sharon's face shift, the smugness fading into frustration. "You don't understand, Ava," Dad said, his voice rising. "This is family. You need to help your sister. I'm asking you to make a sacrifice for the greater good." "Sacrifice?" I echoed. "You're asking me to give up everything I've worked for so Emily can have a place to live." "Why? Because she's your real daughter?" The words cut through the air like a knife, and for a moment, Dad looked like I'd slapped him. He blinked, clearly unprepared for the accusation. But it was too late to take it back. The truth was out. "You misunderstand," he said, his voice low and almost pleading. "Amy needs the apartment. She's been through so much. She's your sister, Ava. She's your family." I stared at him, fighting the urge to laugh. "You want me to give up my home for someone who spent her whole life trying to make mine miserable?" I couldn't stop myself now. You've never seen me as more than an afterthought, Dad. I've been invisible to you for years. Enough, Ava, Dad shouted, slamming his fist on the coffee table. I'm not going to keep going in circles with you. You're out of the will if you don't agree. There it was. The ultimatum. His voice was harsh, but beneath it, I could sense the desperation. The need for control, for things to stay the way they were. He couldn't stand that I was pulling away, that I was refusing to be manipulated. I leaned forward in my chair, my eyes narrowing. I don't need your money, Dad. You want to disown me because I won't let you bully me into giving up what's mine? Fine. Do it. You've already made it clear how little I matter to you. Sharon shot up from her chair, her face contorted in rage. How dare you speak to your father like that? She hissed, her voice shaking with indignation. You're ungrateful. You've always been a problem. I met her gaze, no fear in my eyes. Don't act like you care about me. You never did. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand, cutting her off. This isn't about me giving up my apartment. This is about you using me as a pawn in your little family game. Dad was silent now, his face flushed with anger and shame. He wasn't used to being challenged like this. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. But it's over, Dad. I'm done being your second choice. I'm done playing along with your lies. The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive. Then, for the first time since I'd walked in, I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. I laid it on the table, sliding it across to him. Dad looked at it, then at me. What's this? Open it, I said, my voice steady. He snatched the envelope, his fingers trembling just slightly. I watched as he tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents. The words on the page were clear. The alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. The probability of paternity is 0%. His face paled as he read the results, the color draining from his cheeks. His hands shook as he held the paper in front of him. Sharon gasped, her mouth falling open. This is a mistake, she said quickly, her voice rising in panic. These results are forged. This is all a lie. I remained calm, watching the scene unfold before me. It's not a mistake, Sharon. It's the truth. Amy isn't Dad's daughter. She's Robert's. The room fell completely silent. Amy, who had been staring at her phone, looked up, her face contorted with confusion. What are you talking about? She demanded, but there was no conviction in her voice. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the pictures Jack had taken. I held it up, showing them to Dad. Here's your proof, Dad. There's Sharon at Lorenzo's with Robert, kissing, laughing, being intimate. Sharon's face twisted with a mix of rage and fear as she saw the photos. She staggered back, collapsing onto the couch. David, please, I can explain. I shook my head, my voice cold. You've had 20 years to explain. The truth is you never wanted to. You just wanted to keep lying, and now it's too late. Dad's eyes were wide, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He didn't know what to say. The foundation of his life, everything he had built on the lie of Amy being his daughter, was crumbling. David, Sharon whispered, her voice cracking, please, I love you. The desperation in her voice didn't move me. She didn't deserve pity. Not from me. Not after everything. I looked at Dad one last time. Do you understand now, Dad? Do you see who she really is? He didn't answer. His head dropped, his shoulders slumping as he came to terms with the truth that had been staring him in the face all along. I'm done, I said softly, but my words felt like a declaration of freedom. I'm done with all of this. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving them to deal with the wreckage of their lives. I didn't look back. I knew I was walking away from a family that had never truly been mine, but now I was walking towards something better, something real. The next week passed in a blur. I kept my head down at work, focusing on the tasks in front of me, avoiding anything that would remind me of the storm that had just hit. Every time I picked up my phone, I saw the constant barrage of missed calls from Dad. Sharon's messages were just as persistent, accusing me of trying to tear apart their family. I didn't reply to any of them. There was no point. They didn't get it. They never would. I heard through the grapevine that Sharon and Amy had moved in with Robert Mitchell, her colleague at Riverside Insurance, the man I'd seen in the photos. They probably thought they were going to start over, live the life they'd secretly planned. But honestly, I didn't care. Their drama wasn't mine anymore. I had my own life to figure out. I didn't need their chaos following me. Then, one afternoon, Dad's name popped up on my phone again. I hesitated. I had been avoiding him for days, but something in me, curiosity, maybe a small sliver of hope, made me answer. "Ava," he said, his voice rougher than usual, like he hadn't slept in days. "Can we meet? I want to talk." I looked at the clock. It was nearly 3:30 and I was done with work for the day. Maybe this was it. Maybe he finally understood, or maybe he just wanted to apologize. But I wasn't sure if I was ready for any of it. "Where?" I asked, my voice flat. "Carson's Cafe," he said, the words sounding like they had been rehearsed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I agreed, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I needed him to admit what he'd done to me all these years. Or maybe, just maybe, I needed to see if there was any chance he could actually change. When I walked into Carson's, I spotted him immediately. He was sitting in the corner, staring down at a half-empty cup of coffee, his shoulders slumped, looking older than I had ever seen him. His wedding ring was conspicuously missing. The man who once towered over me with strength now seemed to have crumbled under the weight of his own choices. I took a deep breath and walked over. He didn't notice me at first, but when I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, he lifted his eyes. They were red, like he'd been crying. It made something inside me ache, but I quickly shoved that feeling aside. "Ava," he said, his voice hoarse, "I've been a terrible father to you." I didn't say anything. I just stared at him, trying to process the words. He continued, the words coming out in a rush. "I didn't see it before," he said, his eyes desperate. "I favored Amy. I let Sharon treat you like you didn't belong in our family. I didn't protect you. I didn't support you. I failed you in every way possible." I couldn't stop myself from feeling a small sense of satisfaction. He was finally admitting it, finally acknowledging the truth. "Yeah," I said, my voice quiet, "you did. And you never would have realized it if you hadn't found out about Amy. If she had been your biological daughter, you would have kept treating me like second class." He winced, as if my words physically hurt him. I could tell he wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. Not anymore. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Give me a chance. Let me try to be the father you deserved. I know I've messed up, but I want to fix it. I want to make things right." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I could see the brokenness in his eyes. But there was a part of me that couldn't just forget the years of neglect, the years of watching him dote on Amy while I was invisible. "You can't just fix it, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "It doesn't work that way. You can't just pretend that everything's fine because you finally see what you did wrong." He reached across the table, but I pulled my hand back before he could touch it. "Please don't," I said softly, my eyes narrowing. "You can't just erase all the pain with a couple of words. It's going to take more than that." He recoiled, but his expression softened. "I know, but I'm willing to try. I've lost so much already, Sharon Amy, and now I'm losing you too." I leaned back in my chair, taking a moment to breathe. Part of me still wanted to scream at him, to demand more from him. But there was another part of me that understood something important. He wasn't the father. I needed him to be, but maybe he could be something else. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Dad," I said quietly, my heart heavy. "And honestly, I don't know if I ever will. But I'm not going to keep carrying your guilt. I'm done being your punching bag." He didn't say anything to that, and for a moment, I thought he might get up and leave. But instead, he just sat there, defeated, watching me as if I was the last thread keeping him from falling apart. "I'm sorry, Ava," he said again, his voice breaking. "I really am." We sat there in silence for a while. I wasn't sure what to say next. What could I say? What could he say? Words couldn't fix years of hurt. "I don't need your money, Dad," I said finally, the words coming out with more force than I intended. "I don't need anything from you anymore. But I do need you to understand something. I've been making it on my own for years. I don't need you to fix it. I need you to be here when I need you, not when it's convenient for you." He looked at me, his expression one of pure regret. "I know," he whispered. "I will. I'll be here. I'll do better." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But after everything, I couldn't be sure. I pushed my chair back and stood, grabbing my purse. I'll be in touch, Dad, but I can't do this right now. He nodded, his eyes hollow. Take care of yourself, Ava. You deserve better than this. Better than me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I walked out of the cafe, leaving him there, a man trying to salvage what was left of his family and his own dignity. The next few weeks were quieter. I kept my distance from Dad, but not entirely. We talked here and there, cautiously navigating this new version of our relationship. He seemed genuinely willing to make an effort, but I wasn't ready to just forgive and forget. I spent more time with my cousins, with people who actually had my back. My apartment became more of a sanctuary than ever, a place where I could finally feel at peace. As for Sharon and Amy, I heard through the grapevine that they were living it up with Robert Mitchell. I didn't care. They were a part of my past now, a chapter that had closed, and I was no longer interested in reading. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was actually moving forward. It was hard, yes, and I still had moments where the anger and hurt crept back, but I was learning how to heal. I was learning that I didn't need them to feel whole. I had built my life on my own, and that was enough. 3 months had passed since I'd walked out of that cafe. 3 months of adjusting to a new kind of normal. There were still days where the weight of everything felt like it was going to crush me those days when I thought about my dad. The lies, the betrayal. But I was learning to let go. I'd always thought that healing meant fixing the broken parts, that I had to put the pieces back together. But now, I was starting to realize it was more about learning to live with the cracks, accepting that things would never be perfect, but that didn't mean they couldn't still be good. Dad and I still saw each other, occasionally lunches at the diner, small conversations about work, life, and random updates. He tried. He really did. But I knew it wasn't the same as it had been before. He had lost something that couldn't be replaced, and so had I. There were moments where he would try to bring up Sharon and Amy, but I would shut it down quickly. I didn't care about them anymore. I didn't want to hear about their new life with Robert Mitchell. Let them live their lies. I was done with them. I spent more time with Aunt Sarah and my cousins, trying to fill the emptiness in my life with people who actually cared. There was no judgment with them, no manipulation. They just accepted me for who I was. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a real family. Work was good too. The project I'd been working on for months finally came to a successful conclusion, and I felt like I had something to be proud of. Not just because of the recognition, but because it was mine. I had earned it, through every late night, every missed weekend. It felt solid, like my life was finally starting to match the image I had in my head. But then one afternoon, my phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. I hesitated before answering, unsure who it was. Ava? A soft voice said, and I immediately recognized it. Amy. I nearly hung up. The last thing I wanted was to hear from her, but I forced myself to stay on the line. Maybe it was time to hear what she had to say, if she was going to say anything at all that wasn't a lie. What do you want? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice small, almost fragile. I frowned, unsure of where this was going. About what? About everything, she said. I know you hate me. I know I've treated you badly. I've always treated you badly. But I don't know how else to say this, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I stared at my phone, processing her words. This wasn't what I expected. After everything, after all the years of torment, she was actually apologizing? Was this some kind of game? A last-ditch attempt to manipulate me into forgiving her? But the sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. I don't even know if you'll believe me, she continued, but I want you to know that I've always felt like I was living in your shadow. Like, everything I did was a reaction to you, to your mom, to Dad's obsession with you. I've been messed up, Ava. I didn't know how to deal with it. Her words were raw, but I wasn't ready to just forgive and forget. Not after all that had happened. I don't want an apology from you, Amy, I said, my voice steady. I don't need it. I don't even care about you anymore. Not in the way I used to. I could hear her sniffle on the other end, and something in me softened. But I pushed the feeling down. This isn't about me, I continued. This is about you and the way you treated me for years. You don't get to just erase all of that with a simple sorry. I know, she said quietly, but I needed to say it. I needed you to hear it. And if you want to hate me forever, I get it. I don't blame you." The line fell silent. I could hear her breathing like she was waiting for me to say anything. "I'm not going to forgive you, Amy," I said, my voice unwavering. "Not today, not tomorrow, maybe never. But I'm done hating you. I'm done carrying that around with me. You don't matter enough for me to keep holding on to that anger." It wasn't the closure I'd been hoping for, but it was the closure I needed. I wasn't going to give her the power to ruin my life anymore. I wasn't going to let her dictate my emotions. "I'll leave you alone now," Amy said quietly. I wanted you to know." And with that, the call ended. The weeks that followed felt like a slow exhale. Things with Dad remained quiet. We had a few more dinners, where he made awkward small talk about work, about his own life. Sharon and Amy were still a part of the conversation here and there, but I kept my distance. There was nothing left for me there. At work, one received a promotion, a step up to a position I hadn't expected. It felt good, but it also felt like the universe was giving me a little nudge. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, was paying off. And it wasn't just about the money or the title, it was about proving to myself that I could do this. I didn't need anyone else's approval. Not Dad's, not Sharon's, not Amy's. I was enough. And that realization, it was the most powerful one I'd ever had. It was on a quiet evening in late spring when I finally allowed myself to visit Grandma Helen's grave. I hadn't been there since the funeral, hadn't really been able to face it, but I felt like I had reached a place where I could. I stood there for a long time, the wind carrying the scent of flowers and earth around me. I spoke to her softly, telling her how much I missed her, how much she had meant to me. And then I told her I was okay. For the first time in years, I truly felt it. I was okay. Story 2, I'm Sophia, and I grew up with the type of privilege that most people can only imagine. Our house was something straight out of a magazine. A well-kept garden, large rooms, and a pool that was the site of innumerable summer celebrations. It was all made possible by my father's business success, which he never allowed us to forget. "Sophia, honey, remember that everything we have comes from hard labor," my father would remark, with that well-known tone of authority and pride in his voice. Even though I was too young to grasp the value of money and was more interested in playing with my cousin Chloe, I would nod and attempt to take in the lesson. Although Chloe was officially my cousin, she was more like my sister, only 1 year my junior. She was the daughter of my father's younger brother, Uncle Mark. Despite the stark difference in our living conditions, our families were united. Your uncle's family needs our support. My mother would explain any time I saw my father providing financial support. Family looks out for family. She was always the tactful one, averting awkward situations when Uncle Mark took another check from Dad. I shared all of my clothing, secrets, and hopes with Chloe. We'd spend hours in my room planning our futures. "We'll go to college together." Lying on my bed and gazing up at the ceiling, Chloe would say. "After that, we'll share apartments with one another. Additionally, our children will be best friends." Till when? Graduation from high school was drawing near. As expected, my father declared that he would cover the cost of both of our college educations. Mom stood beside him, beaming with pride as he made the announcement at our joint graduation party. "Both my daughters deserve the greatest education possible." Placing his arm over each of us, he stated. I remember how Chloe's eyes welled up with tears of gratitude while I just smiled, taking it for granted. Looking back now, I should have noticed the signs, but back then, I was just happy to have my cousin's sister by my side as we packed our bags for college. Together, we were going to face the world. They are like two peas in a pod. We never imagined that everything we believed to be true about our ideal family would be revealed by a wedding present. This will be fantastic. As we decorated our dorm rooms, which were conveniently across the hall from one another, Chloe shrieked, "We can never be separated, can we?" "Sophia, nothing, I promised. With all my heart, I mean it." How foolish we were, God. How foolish I was. That's the problem with ideal families, though. Sometimes they are flawless only because we decide not to examine the foundation's fissures too thoroughly. College passed by quickly than I imagined. I was going across the stage to get my graduation before I even realized it. The audience cheered for my family. I felt really elated. I got a job at a marketing company right away after receiving my degree. Everything looked to be falling into place. Almost everything, actually. Dad, I've been thinking about having my own apartment. Over dinner one evening, I mentioned it. I've been looking through internet apartment ads since I want to have a place of my own. Right, present. The rental industry is booming. With a down payment as well. He interrupted me as I set down this fork, Sophia. You're an independent lady now. You're doing well. You need to start making money on your own. You received an excellent education from your mother and me. It's time for you to take charge of your own life, though. Mom simply nodded in agreement while sitting there. It seemed as if someone had hit me. That's how I ended myself living in a small one-bedroom apartment with half of my wage going toward rent, and my savings growing at an excruciatingly sluggish rate. However, I was determined to demonstrate my independence. Chloe graduated a year later. She revealed her secret as we were celebrating at her favorite restaurant. Jake made a proposal. She flashed a diamond ring and shrieked, "Our wedding is in 4 months." Due to the hectic nature of wedding preparations, 4 months passed quickly. I threw myself into my maid of honor duties, helping Chloe pick out everything from her dress to the table settings. I was very thrilled for her, even if I was having housing issues myself. The wedding day arrived and everything was perfect. The reception was magnificent, and the ceremony was lovely. I watched Chloe dance with Jake, both of them glowing with happiness. After that, my dad got up to speak. "Chloe," he started, his voice husky with passion. "Over the years, you have been like a daughter to me. One of the biggest pleasures of life has been seeing you grow up with Sophia." As I sipped my champagne, I grinned. Typical wedding speech material. However, that's why he went on, removing an envelope. "I have a special gift for you. Something with which to begin your new life. For dramatic effect," he paused. "Your very own apartment's keys." I almost let the glass drop out of my grasp. Applause and gasps filled the crowd. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mark were in tears. Chloe sobbed as she hurried to embrace my dad. "Thank you," into his shoulder. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "You deserve this. I cherish you as if you were my own daughter." As family members gathered around Chloe and Jake to congratulate them on their amazing gift, I sat there speechless. My mind was whirling. My cousin recently received an apartment from the same father who advised me to be independent. I held my champagne glass tightly, fearing it might break. However, I continued to smile, kept performing my part. After all, it was Chloe's day. I wouldn't cause any trouble. I didn't arrive at my parents' house until precisely 3 days after the wedding. My hands were shaking when I rang the doorbell, but my voice was firm when Dad opened the door. "We must speak," I remarked as I passed him and entered the living room I had known so well for so many joyful times. "What's on your mind, Sophia?" As like he hadn't just placed a bomb on my life, he appeared quite composed as he sat down in his favorite recliner. "Really? Are you going to act as though you're unaware?" Too agitated to sit, I remained standing. "You advised me to support myself, to be self-sufficient. But you simply gave Chloe an apartment like it was nothing. Do you want to elaborate?" Dad sighed as if I were being crazy. "It's different with Chloe. You have more opportunities than she does. Not the same." "How?" "We attended the same university, received the same education, and you covered the costs. By the way, her family is not wealthy. Sophia, Jake's family isn't well off either. They need help starting their lives, but your uncle cannot afford it." He bent over. "At the current cost, they would never have enough money saved for a home of their own." I let out a sharp laugh. "Beau and I can half the nation rent. Dad, what I'm doing is something they could have done. Like everyone else, work, save money, and rent an apartment. It's mercantile of you." His composed exterior broke as he snapped, "You are not the focus of this. I own this money. I also choose how to spend it. I aid your uncle's family because they need it. Mercantile." I raised my voice. "Money isn't the issue here. It has to do with justice. When you treat your niece better than your own daughter, how does it make you feel? That's sufficient." Mom rushed into the space. I was completely unaware that she was at home. "How dare you dispute your father's decisions? You have no authority to advise him how to spend his money. Oh, so this is acceptable to you?" I looked over at her. While asking his own daughter to struggle, your spouse is giving an apartment to another woman's daughter. Young woman, don't take things personally. Anger was red on Mom's face. Everything has been given for you by your father. And you pay him back like this? With demands and feelings of jealousy. Now I was virtually yelling. Do you believe that envy is at play here? Respect is at issue here, about showing the same consideration you give to others to your own child. Leave now. It was Dad's voice. Until you are able to express gratitude for all that we have done for you and express regret for this behavior. Leave my house. Thank you. I reached for my handbag. Additionally, don't worry about helping me out in any other way. I'm not interested in your charity. As I climbed into my car, tears of rage burned in my eyes. The money wasn't the point. It had never been. The double standard was at issue. About my father asking me to get tougher while going out of his way for Chloe. Many things may change in 5 years. They altered nearly every aspect of my situation. I established my career ascending through the ranks at my marketing agency to become a senior account manager. I worked hard to accumulate money, but it was far from enough to cover a down payment in this crazy market. And most significantly, I discovered Michael. It was at a client meeting that he entered my life. We were working with him as our creative director, and something clicked. I knew I had finally found someone who genuinely put me first when he proposed on a random Tuesday night as we were preparing supper. The planning of the wedding got on right away. We decided to go on a date in the early summer, and I approached it with the same tenacity that I used to every other aspect of my life. The outfit was selected, and the location was reserved. Then the most difficult part arrived, the list of guests. Even though choosing who wouldn't be on it wasn't difficult, I spent hours at my kitchen table looking over names and relationships. It had been 5 years since I'd spoken to Chloe or my parents, not since Chloe's offensive Facebook post. I have an apartment and a husband, so you're simply envious. But you don't have either. Adult up. Sophia, perhaps you would have both by now if you weren't so entitled. However, I suppose that some people simply cannot bear to watch others prosper. After that, I blocked her. That was simpler, cleaner. I attempted to put the family that had treated me like a second-class daughter behind me, started a new life, and surrounded myself with people who appreciated me. However, even in shattered homes, word spreads quickly. My phone rang when I was at my apartment, looking around floral arrangements and trying to decide between peonies and roses. For the first time in 5 years, Dad's name appeared on the screen. As I responded, my hands trembled and my heart sprang into my throat. Sophia. In other ways, his voice sounded older and more worn out. I've heard that congratulations are due. Who informed you? I spoke more steadily than I actually felt. Is it important? You invited me to your wedding, but why didn't you? I could hear the anguish in his voice as he stopped. Your father is me. You should be escorted down the aisle by me. Before I could stop myself, I let out a bitter chuckle. Really? Sophia, do you wish to play the father card now, in fact? I want to know. I cut him off, feeling irresponsible. I had suppressed all of my feelings for the past 5 years, but something about hearing his voice had let them loose. As a wedding present, will you be giving me an apartment? Like you did for Chloe, you know. I believed he had hung up since the stillness on the other end was so long. He cleared his throat at last. You see, recently, business hasn't been fantastic. I am able to provide you with $5,000 for the wedding. It's a really kind present. You ought to be thankful. $5,000. I felt that old, familiar burn of wrath building in my throat after seeing Chloe the entire flat. It seems that certain things remained constant. I appreciate your kindness, Dad. I responded, cynicism leaking from my voice. But don't spend your money. I don't require it. Before he could reply, the line died. I glanced at my phone, my hands quivering slightly, wondering whether that 5-year stillness had been better than this reminder of why I'd broken touch in the first place. The following morning, the notice appeared on my phone. My gut nodded when I opened it because Robert Anderson shared a post that my father didn't often share on social media. My hands began to shake. I never imagined having to write about my own kid in this way. Although the post started, Sophia has now shown her actual nature. As a wedding present, she is requesting an apartment, saying that if I don't cooperate, she won't ask me to her wedding. I'm heartbroken by her mercenary attitude and selfishness. How did the girl I reared fare? Linda was instantly inundated with comments. Helen, thank you. Could she be James's cousin? Some individuals never show gratitude for what they have. People, the first didn't even know were contributing. Such gifts are not anything you can demand. A daughter who blackmails her own father is what type of daughter? Before I could stop myself, my fingers were flying over the keyboard. It's a principal issue. For my cousin's wedding, you provided her with an apartment. The same respect should be shown to your own daughter, or at the very least, a justification for the disparity in care. However, the remarks continued, each one more judgmental than the previous. I could hardly type because my hands were trembling so much. However, something inside of me had exploded. I started writing after opening a new post. I'd like to share a tale with you all that has been hurting me for years. I started. It concerns a parent who consistently gives his niece preferential treatment over his own daughter. I'll outline the methods. Each birthday. While mine were informal family get-togethers, Chloe was treated to extravagant parties. Dad always took Chloe shopping alone when we traveled overseas as a family, purchasing extras for her. I never did. She always had twice as much money in her pocket as I did. I'm grateful that Dad covered her schooling. He did for both of us. He told me to be independent and gave her an apartment as a wedding present. Instead of having her own first dance at Chloe's wedding, she danced with my father. And what do you know? This whole issue appears suspect the more I consider it. Even if Chloe turned out to be my father's kid, I wouldn't be shocked. Before I could question myself, I pushed post. The words looked back at me from the screen. Our family's meticulously preserved facade was struck by a nuclear weapon. Now, there would be no turning back. The fallout of my piece was nuclear. Within hours, my phone was exploding up with calls and texts from every corner of the family. Some relatives instantly said they wouldn't be attending my wedding. First to call was Mom, her voice shrill with rage. How are you able to? Are you aware of the damage you have caused to this family? Your dad is inconsolable. This is not how we brought you up. Next came Dad's call. An outpouring of anger and charges that I was ruining the family name. Before he hung up, he spat, "You're dead to me." Sarah's call was especially bitter. "What a spiteful little bitch you are." She gave a hiss. "You're jealous of my daughter's happiness? How dare you say that?" Then Chloe's message appeared. "Congratulations on displaying what a crazy, paranoid person you became. I feel sad for your fiancé. He's marrying a deluded lady who invents 6 stories about her own family. As she is unable to cope with not being the focus of attention. You don't need to block me. I'll do it myself." I silently blocked all of the people that sent offensive texts or remarks. I convinced myself it was for the best, but my wedding guest list became much smaller. During the entire experience, only Uncle Mark said nothing, which was strangely consoling in the midst of the mayhem. Preparations for the wedding took up the following 2 months. During it all, Michael was my pillar of support, supporting me when I changed seating charts and canceled play sets. They never questioned my decision to break off my family. Then, one wet night, I heard someone knock on my door. Uncle Mark appeared to have gone days without sleep as he stood there. "Can I come in?" Quietly, he asked. "We must speak." My uncle had never looked so broken in my life. He took a big seat on my couch, hands pressed closely together. His knuckles were white. He started by saying, "Your post about your father's treatment of Chloe, it got me to thinking." Genuinely considering everything and keeping in mind, he informed me about my father's constant presence in their home throughout the early years of their marriage, saying that using the bus was unsafe. He would drive Sarah home from work. Even before she became pregnant with Chloe, this was the case. He brought her gifts all the time, costly ones. God, I thought, what an idiot I was. I assumed he was simply being a giving brother. Uncle Mark spoke in a broken voice. His hands were shaking as he went under his jacket and took out an envelope. "I have to be aware. I simply had to know after reading your post." Official lab letterhead was used to print the DNA test results. Hair samples were taken from my father, Chloe, and all 3 of them by my uncle. The results were clear. Only an uncle's link was shown by Uncle Mark's 84% genetic match with Chloe. In contrast, My father's paternal match was 99.99%. Today, Sarah came clean about everything. Before Chloe was ever created, he muttered. They had been having an affair for 25 years. We remained there until far past midnight, putting together memories that suddenly made terrifying sense. The extravagant presents, the preferential treatment. My father always appeared to be the first to hear about Chloe's life. During Aunt Sarah's pregnancy, he had insisted on taking her to her doctor's appointments. Sophia, I'm so sorry. As he was leaving, Uncle Mark said, I ought to have noticed it. Ought should have known. With his shoulders slumped under the burden of 20 years of treachery, I watched him make his way to his car in the rain. I was correct, but for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I didn't feel satisfied. The morning after Uncle Mark's visit changed everything. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother while I was still processing our conversation. Sophia, your uncle just departed. We must speak. In an hour, might we meet at Rosemary's Cafe? She was already there, seated in a booth in the corner, and she didn't appear to have slept. I saw that her hands, which were around an unopened coffee cup, were trembling a little. Before I could even sit down, she added, I filed for divorce. I just came from the lawyer's office. Her voice cracked. I never knew, even after 25 years of marriage. I never wanted to know. Perhaps Uncle Mark had told her all about it. The DNA test findings and Sarah's confession. The decades-long romance. He'd filed for divorce, too. Incapable of remaining wed to a lady who led such a profoundly deceptive life. Sophia. Mom took my hands and reached across the table. Her eyes were filled with tears. You deserve my sincerest apologies. All these years, I protected him. I took his side. As I saw him give preference to Chloe, I told myself it didn't matter. I ought to have paid attention to you. I ought to have seen what was taking place in my own house. Mom, I'll finish now. I was furious when you blogged about your suspicions. I believed you were attempting to harm us, seeking retribution. However, you are the only one with the courage to express what we all ought to have noticed. We sobbed and chatted for hours at that cafe, starting the gradual healing process. We drank wine together as Mom informed me about all the warning flags she had disregarded over the years. Every moment that made awful sense all of a sudden. Someone began beating on my door later that night when I was at home trying to take in all that had transpired. My father was right there when I opened it. His angry face turned crimson. Are you content now? Pushing past me into my flat, he yelled, You've ruined everything. Because you couldn't keep your tongue shut, 2 families were devastated. I didn't ruin anything, I answered, finding my voice surprisingly steady. Did you do this? You made a decision 25 years ago that would ruin these families. I just revealed the reality, his face contorted. I'm not going to your wedding, though. For the truth, how's that? I had no intention of inviting you. Silently, I said. It's been years since you were a true father to me. After that, it's resolved. He grinned. I no longer consider you my daughter. A peculiar serenity descended upon me. It's okay. I grinned. In any case, don't you have another daughter? His shocked expression was nearly hilarious. Before he could answer, I motioned for him to go and open the door. When he did, I left him standing in the hallway and shut it securely behind him. I gave Uncle Mark a call that night. I called his phone, my hands shaking a little. I want to ask you something, Uncle Mark. I inhaled deeply. At my wedding, will you accompany me down the aisle? Before he could say anything, there was a lengthy silence during which I heard him clear his throat many times. I would be honored, Sophia. Preparations for the wedding took up 2 months. In some ways, the fact that the guest list was less than anticipated added to its specialness. Every attendee who stood with me when it would have been easy to turn a blind eye had chosen truth over cozy falsehoods. The garden setting was lovely, with peonies and white roses all over it. Mom was sitting in the first row, using a tissue to dab at her eyes. I noticed tears in Uncle Mark's eyes as well when he took my arm to lead me down the aisle. My parents' divorce process proceeded fairly swiftly. Dad consented to everything simply to get it over with, according to what Mom subsequently told me. Maybe in an attempt to downplay the issue. Mom got a $200,000 payment after they reached an out-of-court settlement. One afternoon, my mother stopped by my leased apartment where I was writing thank you notes for the wedding. I want this for you. Sliding an envelope over my coffee table, she murmured. A check for the entire settlement amount was inside. I don't require this cash. I need my daughter to have the house she is entitled to. She grabbed my hand and squeezed it. Think of that as payback for all the years I didn't defend you. You succeeded. I did, but we're now making amends. She grinned. Furthermore, there's no greater use for his money than to give you what he ought to have given you years ago. I'll act as though depositing the check didn't make me cry. Well, Michael and I are hoping to find the ideal apartment, a lovely 3-bedroom apartment with a balcony and enough space to start a family. I always feel like justice has been done when I unlock our front door. Last month, Dad and Aunt Sarah tied the knot. It came to my attention through the family rumor. It seems that they didn't even wait for their divorce papers' ink to dry. Their relationship is no longer a secret. Photos of happy couples abound on their social media, as though the last 25 years of deceit had never occurred. Their accounts are not followed by me. I don't have to. The majority of our family members supported Mom and me. Even those who initially supported Dad were unable to dismiss the information after the DNA findings were made public. Every Sunday, Uncle Mark joins us for dinner. After the betrayal, he is now cautiously re-entering the dating scene. Mom frequently joins us and observes their joint healing. It has been lovely to see a sister-in-law and brother-in-law united by their common suffering. I occasionally think of Chloe late at night, regarding the fact that, in legal terms, she is my half-sister. I wonder whether she was aware of our father's partiality or if she ever had any suspicions about it. However, such ideas no longer keep me up at night. My life is finally my own family, my own house, founded on openness rather than secrecy. Story 3. My name's Isabella and I'm 21 years old. I just finished my 3rd year at art college, and let me tell you, it's been one hell of a ride. However, you must understand my background before I delve into all of that. I grew up in a house where I never felt at home. My parents, Tom and Sarah, always made it clear that my older sister, Emily, was their golden child. She's 4 years older than me and has always been a thorn in my side from the day I was born. Emily appeared to despise me. She'd torment me, break my things, and make my life terrible. And my parents, they'd just laugh it off, saying, "Oh, that's just how sisters are." But it wasn't normal. I remember when I was 14, I had this huge crush on a boy at school. I thought he was the cutest thing ever, and his name was Jake. I'd spend hours drawing portraits of him in secret, hiding them under my mattress where I thought no one would find them. But Emily found them. And you know what she did? She displayed them for everyone to see by pinning them to the school bulletin board. I vividly recall coming into school that day. The laughter, the pointing, the whispers. It seemed like the whole world was tumbling down around me and Jake. He walked up to me all embarrassed and stuttering. "I saw the drawings, Isabella." "Look, you're sweet and all, but I don't like you that way." That day, I sobbed as I ran home. My parents were in the kitchen when I burst through the door, tears streaming down my face. "Dad, Mom!" I was humiliated at school by Emily. She found my secret sketches in. But before I could finish, Emily waltzed in, a smug look on her face. She used the nickname, "Oh, come on, Izzy," I hated. It was just a bit of fun. "Not my fault you can't take a joke. You are aware of what my parents did?" They laughed. "They actually laughed, sweetie," my mother remarked, blotting her eyes with laughter. "You really need to toughen up. It's not Emily's fault. You're such a crybaby. That's why when I got accepted into art college, I was over the moon. It was my ticket out of that house. Get away from the continual belittling and ridicule. In other words, the only person who ever truly loved me was my grandmother. She was the one who informed me I had potential and supported my artwork. When I got admitted, she insisted on paying for my tuition. "Isabella," she said, her eyes twinkling, "you've got a gift. Nobody should be able to convince you otherwise. I'll see to it that you receive the education you are due." She covered everything for 3 years. My tuition, my supplies, even little more for living expenses. But then, shortly before my last year, she got sick. I recall holding her weak hand while I sat by her bedside. She looked at me with those loving eyes of hers and said, "Isabella, my darling, I'm very proud of you. You're going to do big things." Then she turned to my parents who were standing at the foot of the bed. "I need you to make me a promise, Sarah and Tom. Promise me you'll pay for Isabella's last year. She needs to finish her studies." My parents nodded seriously. "Naturally, Mom," my dad said. "We promise." Grandma died a week later at the reading of her will. We learned that she left her jewels to Emily and me and her home to my dad. Emily, of course, instantly snatched the diamond tiara. "I'll accept this," she declared. "I'll give the ring to Isabella. She doesn't care about jewelry anyway, right, Izzy?" I refrained from arguing. She was correct. Jewelry didn't really appeal to me. So I took the diamond ring and put it in a safety deposit box at the bank. In college, I rapidly established friends. There was Zoe, a punk rocker with a penchant for abstract painting, and Marcus, a quiet person who could build sculptures that took a breath away. They didn't care about my family drama. To them, I was just Isabella, the girl who could paint like nobody's business. "Bella, hello." Using the moniker I genuinely loved, Zoe commented one day. "There's a tattoo parlor downtown looking for someone to draw designs. You ought to submit an application." I was hesitant at first. My folks would flip if they realized I was working in a tattoo business. However, I reasoned that I shouldn't give a damn about their opinions. So I applied, and to my amazement, I got the job. After seeing my portfolio, the proprietor, Mike, a muscular man with more than skin, declared, "You're hired, kid." In my life, for the first time, I was making money on my own. I had it, even though it wasn't much. I kept it a secret from Emily and my parents. Emily's derisive voice was already audible to me. "Oh, Izzy is doing drawings for gangsters right now. How adorable." I was a good fit for college life. I pushed myself into my studies, trying to make my grandma pleased. My lecturers liked my work, and I even won a few little competitions. More significantly, though, I was content. Years passed quickly, and before I knew it, I was wrapping things up. I'm in my third year. The summer vacation was drawing near. My stomach was filled with a familiar dread. I needed to return home. I stepped into chaos as soon as I opened the door. There were lots of people in the living room, all moving around excitedly. Emily stood in the middle of it all, holding up a white dress with a smile on her face. My mother spotted me first. "Oh, Isabella," she said. Her smile wavered a little. "You're at home. We didn't anticipate you arriving so quickly." Stunned, I stood there. "Emily's getting married. When? When did this happen?" Emily looked across at me, her smile turning into a smirk. "Oh, didn't anyone tell you? I suppose the preparations have kept us all quite busy." We must have forgotten about it. It seemed as though someone had hit me in the stomach. My own sister was getting married, and no one had even bothered to tell me. Who is the fortunate one? Trying to stabilize my son, I managed to ask. "It's Richard," Emily said, bringing forward a tall, attractive man I had not previously seen. "Isn't he dreamy?" Richard smiled politely at me and held out his hand. "Isabella, nice to meet you. I've heard so much about you." I shook his hand, wondering what exactly he'd heard. Nothing positive, presumably, knowing Emily. I awoke the following morning to the sound of animated conversation coming from downstairs. At the breakfast table, Emily was presiding over our parents and a few of her bridesmaids. I overheard them talking and discovered that Emily had ended her relationship with her ex-boyfriend at our parents' request. He had apparently been mingled with a hazardous group of people. "We are grateful that you heard us, my love," Mom murmured, stroking Emily's hand. "Richard's family is quite wealthy, and he is a much better fit for you." It was impossible for me not to roll my eyes. They cared about it, of course. Emily turned to grin at me and said, "Talking about Richard. He's bringing me out to supper tonight. Not that you'd know anything about that. He still hasn't found a boyfriend at this time." As they all laughed, I clenched my fists around my coffee mug and forced myself not to cry. There are certain things that never change. I made an effort to avoid getting in anyone's way as the days went by. I stayed in my room most of the time, drawing and counting down the days until I could get out. However, I was unable to skip the family meal one evening. Emily delivered her bombshell as we were all sat around the table. Grandma said, "I've decided to wear her tiara to the wedding. With my dress, it will look fantastic." Well, what a great idea, Mom cried out. Emily wasn't finished. However, do you know what might improve it even further? Oh, well, I'm not sure if I'd have a piece to match it, a ring. Halfway to my lips, I froze my fork. I knew precisely where this was headed. Mom's eyes glowed. Yes, exactly, Isabella. Grandma left you a ring, didn't she? I nodded slowly as my stomach began to get uneasy. Emily clapped her hands together and exclaimed, Well, there you go. Izzy, would you mind lending me the ring for the wedding? I set my fork down. How long can you borrow? Emily laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. Izzy, you're so dumb. You'll give it to me for keeps after all, however. Grandma left that up to me, though. I objected weakly. Isabella, hurry up, Dad said, his voice severe. Don't be selfish. Today is the day of your sister's wedding. Hoping to see someone, I glanced around the table. Anyone on my side, but all I saw were eager faces waiting for me to give in, as usual. Isabella. Dad stated in a chilly tone, We won't cover your last year of college until you give your sister the ring. There was silence in the room. What I was hearing was unbelievable. However, But, Granny, you made a commitment. With tears in my eyes, I whispered. Emily chuckled harshly. Oh, please. Promises made to a half-wit mature lady are of no importance to anyone. I got up so quickly that my chair toppled over. You have no right to speak that way about Grandma. I yelled. That's sufficient. Dad gave Isabella a shout. Either your schooling or the ring is up to you. Make a choice. I examined their faces. Dad's rage. Mom's disappointment. Emily. Smug contentment. I realized then that I had lost once more. I removed the necklace that held the key to my safety deposit box with trembling hands. The morning following the ring incident, I gave it to Emily. Emily was cornered in the kitchen by me. What time is your wedding? Trying to speak steadily, I asked. Emily had a cheeky smirk on her lips as she looked up from her coffee. The date is the 29th. Why? Are you going to wreck it? I dismissed her remark. 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks to leave this poisonous place. No, I said calmly. I'm going to pay a college pal a visit. I will return in time for the nuptials. For the first time in days, I packed my things and headed out that afternoon to visit my friend Zoe in the next city over. I had the feeling that I could breathe. During the week, Zoe and I went to neighborhood cafes, looked at art galleries, and simply enjoyed each other's company. It was just what I required. But precisely 1 week later, my peaceful moment was upended. I came upon it while perusing my social media feed. Emily's wedding pictures. With my ring gleaming on her finger and a diamond tiara glistening on her head, my sister looked stunning in white. Just married was the caption. Off to the Maldives with my hunky husband. I felt as though trembling hands had hit me in the stomach. I called my mother. Why didn't you invite me to the wedding? Emily informed me the wrong date. A lengthy pause ensued. The voice of Dad then entered the line. Isabella? Your sister? You weren't welcome there. She claimed you'd spoil her wonderful day. We believed it was better not to tell you. I had the feeling that I might get sick. How could you harm me like this? I am also your daughter, Mom said. Don't be dramatic. After all, you didn't really want to be there, did you? My entire body trembled with hurt and rage as I hung up. When I got home a few days later, I discovered Emily had also come back from her honeymoon. Her parents were gathered together, perusing housing listings, when I entered the living room. When I cleared my throat, everyone looked up. Remember my tuition, I said in a low voice. If I handed Emily the ring, you would cover my final year's expenses. Dad moved apprehensively. In fact, Isabella, we've made the decision to put that money toward Emily's apartment down payment. The floor seemed to have fallen out from under me. However, you made a pledge. You vowed to your grandmother, Mom responded dismissively. Plans change. Emily is more in need of it. You can work something out, I'm sure. Before I realized what I was doing, Emily was still laughing. A mean, demeaning sound that made my fury boil. I grabbed a handful of her hair and pounced at her. Everyone started yelling as Emily screamed. Dad pulled me away, his cheeks flushed with rage. That's sufficient. He let forth a shout. Isabella, leave this home immediately. I slammed the front door behind me as I hurried to my room, packed some things in a bag, and left. When I was leaving the house, my cheeks were moist with tears, and my heart was racing. I came to a realization. For days, I felt lost and devastated when I returned to Zoe's apartment. I alternated between sobbing and looking at the walls of her guest room, hardly leaving it. Despite Zoe's best efforts to console me, I was distraught. A week went by in this fog of hopelessness. Then, one morning, while idly going through my emails, I came across a note that broke my heart. Well done. The yearly art school competition has been won by you. A complete scholarship for your last year of study is part of your reward. Unbelieving my eyes, I read the email 3 times. Then I screamed, and Zoe started to flee. With tears of joy running down my cheeks, I pushed my phone at her. I prevailed. I was awarded a scholarship. I can complete my education. As Zoe read the email, her eyes grew wide. Then she drew me into an embrace that crushed my bones. Bella, oh my God, this is incredible. For the first time in weeks, I had a glimmer of optimism I could finish my degree without my parents' aid. I could do it on my own. I pushed myself into my studies with newfound enthusiasm when the new semester began. I hardly had time to consider my family's problems because of my schoolwork and part-time employment at the tattoo parlor. After several months, I gradually began to recover. My classmate Jake, who worked part-time at a nearby pawn shop, and I were hanging around one day. He made a comment that drew my attention while we were discussing our day. "You won't believe what occurred during my shift today," he remarked. "I have never seen a more exquisite diamond ring and necklace than the one this girl brought in. It must have been quite valuable." A beat skipped in my chest. "How did she appear?" Trying to seem informal, I asked. The lady Jake described sounded just like Emily. "Could you please sketch the jewelry?" With my hands trembling a little, I asked. Jake obeyed despite his perplexed expression. I was confirming my assumptions as I watched him draw. The jewelry was the one Emily had always talked about. "What about the ring?" "The ring belonged to my grandma," I said, dry-mouthed Jake. "Could you please provide me with the pawn shop surveillance footage?" Jake eventually agreed, perhaps seeing the despair in my gaze. "I'll see what I can do, all right." Jake gave me a USB disk a few days later. "But you didn't get this from me," he continued. "All right?" With shaking hands, I hurried back to my dorm room after giving an appreciative nod. I opened the video file after plugging in the drive. There was Emily, clear as day, handing over the jewelry. However, what transpired next left me speechless. She was about to walk away when a man walked into the picture. Emily embraced him and gave him a passionate kiss. Richard wasn't the one. The man turned slightly in dismay, and I moved closer to the screen, my heart racing. I knew who he was. It was Emily's ex-boyfriend, whom our parents had forced her to split from due to his involvement in illegal activities. I reclined, my head spinning. Emily was reportedly cheating on her husband with her criminal ex-boyfriend and had pawned her valuables, including my grandmother's ring. A part of me wanted to email my parents this video right now. To Richard. To all those who had ever fallen for Emily's falsehoods. But I hesitated in another way. It was a huge one. Too enormous to take rash action on. After several months, I believed that my family's drama was behind me. Then my phone rang without warning. It was my mother, sister Isabella, and Aunt Lisa. She chirped, her voice full of joy. "Darling, I have wonderful news. Your sister is expecting a child. Is it not unbelievable? Next week is their big announcement celebration. Isn't it thrilling?" My heart fell. Naturally, I had not received an invitation to another family gathering. "Aunt Lisa, that's fantastic. Thank you for informing me." I hung up and sat on my bed, feeling torn. I wanted to ignore it and keep severing my relationship with my poisonous family. But another aspect of myself, the portion that retained the nearby pawn shop's footage, this may be my opportunity. I was standing outside my parents' house a week later. I could hear conversations and laughing coming from the cars along the road. I inhaled deeply before approaching the front door and ringing the bell. The door was opened by Mom, her grin rapidly disappearing as she spotted me. "What are you doing here, Isabella?" Shoving past her, I entered the living area. As others began to notice me, the commotion subsided. Emily, standing in the center of the room with Richard, looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Why is she in this place?" Emily gave a hiss. The room echoed with Dad's speech. "Isabella, Leave this house right away. This is not a place for you." Among the visitors, there were confused whispers. I noticed Richard's parents looking at each other anxiously. Mom, always one for saving. Fake grin painted on the face. "I apologize to all of you. We've had to keep Isabella at a distance. She has grown incredibly avaricious and unworthy of our family's reputation." Arguments erupted in the room. While some family members supported my parents, others stood up for me. I spoke louder. "I want to share something." The room gradually became silent. Everyone was watching me. I looked across at Emily. "Congratulations on a successful pregnancy. However, I must inquire as to why you do not wear Grandma's ring and tiara." Emily's complexion turned white. Her mother-in-law raised her voice. "I haven't seen that lovely ring in a long time, now that you bring it up. Emily, please." "What location is it?" Emily stumbled. I had them restored. They had to be cleaned." I took out my phone and nodded gently. "I have a video here that gives a different tale, so that's intriguing." Emily's face lost color when I plugged my phone into the TV. The pawn shop surveillance footage started to play. Emily was pawning the jewels, and she was as transparent as day. Then came the moment when Emily threw herself into the arms of a man who was very clearly not Richard, causing everyone in the room to gasp, kissing him passionately. When the video came to a close, the living room was in a state of chaos. Richard turned to Emily, his face twisted with anguish and anger. "What is this, Emily? Who is that man?" he yelled. His voice broke. Emily started crying, her mascara running down her cheeks. I can clarify." With a stern tone, Richard's mother spoke up. "Emily, I believe we should all be given an explanation." Richard's father, a severe-looking man, spoke up. "I believe a paternity test is urgently needed." As accusations flew and tempers heated, I discreetly slipped out of the home. I had fulfilled my destiny. The facts were out, and I felt as though a burden had been lifted for the first time in years. Over the course of the following several weeks, the family gossip revealed the entire scope of Emily's deceit. I found out that, behind Richard's back, she had been meeting up with her ex-boyfriend, the one with criminal ties. In order to pay off Richard's bills, she even pawned her jewels and spent his money on him. The last nail in the coffin was the paternity test results. Richard did not own the baby. Her ex-boyfriend owned it. Richard, devastated, understandably, filed for a divorce. He filed a large lawsuit against Emily, claiming money fraud and emotional harm. Her former partner disappeared without a trace after finding out about the pregnancy, leaving Emily to deal with the fallout on her alone. My parents, who had always held Emily in high regard, had to confront the harsh truth of what she had done. To assist Emily in paying the compensation, they had to take out a sizable loan. Richard made a demand. They had to pick up the pieces after their golden child fell from grace. In a bizarre turn of circumstances, they attempted to place all the responsibility on me. Mom's voice was angry and resentful when she left a message on my phone. "Are you content now, Isabella? Your sister's life has been damaged by you. I hope you feel proud of who you are." I didn't reply and erase the message. I could no longer be harmed by their words. For my part, I went back to school, devoted myself to my studies, and concentrated on creating the life I had always desired. I changed my email address and phone number, and I stopped talking to my family. At last, the poisonous cycle was ended. It's been 2 years since that terrible day when I uncovered Emily's falsehoods. I received honors when I graduated from art college. My final piece winning accolades from both teachers and local art reviewers. Now, age 23, I'm working at the Harmony Art Gallery in the city. It's a dream come true. Every day, I am surrounded by stunning pieces of art, assist in curating shows, and even plan events for upcoming artists. That's not all, though. In my spare time, I've begun painting, and to my astonishment and joy, many collectors have expressed interest in my work. Even though I still draw tattoos in my free time, I haven't forgotten my origins. It has developed into a treasured pastime that serves as a reminder of my progress and a link to the past. I always smile when I see that some of my designs have even appeared in tattoo publications. The situation with my family is a complex one. A few aunts and cousins who supported me during the aftermath are still in contact with me, They keep me updated on the family issues, though I try not to let it affect me anymore. I've heard that Emily continues to live with our parents. She's jobless, attempting to raise her child alone. She is under continual pressure from her parents, who are struggling financially, to get a job and move out. The disputes are frequent and nasty. I've reportedly not spoken to Emily or my parents since that day. In the beginning, they made several attempts to get in touch, voicemails filled with anger and guilt-tripping sentiments. However, I remained steadfast in my choice to sever relations. They eventually gave up trying. On a more positive note, I've spent the last year dating a fantastic man named Alex. I met him at a gallery event. He is a graphic designer. He's kind, supportive, and best of all, he understands my passion for art. We're discussing moving in together shortly. One more step in creating the life I desire.